Alright, welcome to the channel everybody. Today's video is going to be on why David Benioff and Dan Weiss have left the Star Wars franchise after they decided to end Game of Thrones prematurely. And so we're going to dig into the Game of Thrones information first to kind of explain what is happening and why they've taken the actions to what they've done for Star Wars and how they were supposed to lead the next 3 movies as a new trilogy as prequels to the prequels that we got for Phantom Menace, Clone Wars, and Revenge of the Sith. So right here from Vice we have a article, and it is Game of Thrones ended in the worst way possible. So I didn't watch Game of Thrones. My wife has seen it. A lot of people I know have seen it, and it's been arguable that the ending for Game of Thrones was terrible. It was rushed, and it did a lot of injustice for fans of the show. So looking at this, in The Iron Throne, the final episode of Game of Thrones, nearly every decision was the wrong one. You survived 8 long years of Game of Thrones, and somehow you still expected more. But this is no longer the show that made its lead character headless after Season 2. Or before Season 2, it is not the show that killed off many of its central characters in The Red Wedding. This isn't that Game of Thrones, the global phenomenon that ended any expectations from the fantasy genre. Instead, the biggest surprise of the show's series finale, The Iron Throne, is that every predictable thing happened in the worst way possible. Game of Thrones continued to chase the same themes around politics, espionage, and spectacle until the final credits rolled, but the Season 8 short change, largely brought on by showrunners David Benioff and D.B. Weiss's desire to end the show before it was ready, produced one of the worst endings in prestige TV history. Now, remember this. It is fact that they wanted to be out, especially after Season 6. Season 1 through 5 was based on George R.R. Martin's novels that he made or wrote for Game of Thrones, and then they turned into a TV show. Because they surpassed his novels and they had to work solely based off of their own creative abilities after Season 6, they wanted out. So just again, 1 season after they took creative control, they wanted out. Now, what happened with Star Wars? Star Wars was sold from George Lucas. Lucasfilm was sold to Disney, and in October 31st, 2015, and December 31st, 2015, George Lucas says to Business Insider that he sold Star Wars to white slavers. So kind of a very interesting title, but I'm not going to dig too deep into this. I'll leave links to all this in the description for any of you guys that want to read more into it. But in a recent interview with Charlie Rose, George Lucas let some of his true feelings for Star Wars, The Force Awakens, and Disney slip. Lucas, who created the Star Wars saga, said that he was against making the new movie for the fans and felt he sold the company he created, Lucasfilm, to the white slavers, referring to Disney. Now, he has gone on record to apologize for his remark to Disney, but in a way, anything that Disney has touched more has the opposite of the Midas touch. It does not turn to gold, it turns to trash, especially because they're really trying to be new age agenda based. And there's a video that I made, it'll be linked up here, and you guys can watch it if you want. It's kind of a controversial video. It's a 2-parter about the new movements that have been going on in Hollywood and just in everyday life in general now. And the House of Mouse is buying out movie studios and production companies and is just tarnishing and trashing everything that once was to try to fit the agenda that they have for today's standards. Now, going into how Game of Thrones and Star Wars are connected, divided attention and toxic fandom, why the Game of Thrones duo bailed on Star Wars, referring to Benioff and Weiss. So it's interesting because they actually were signed to do Star Wars in February 2018. Lucasfilm's Kathleen Kennedy is on the hunt for new filmmakers as David Benioff and Dan Weiss leave a galaxy far, far away over their commitment to a lucrative $250 million Netflix deal. Sometime this past summer, David Benioff and Dan Weiss took their families to Italy. It was partially vacation, but the Game of Thrones showrunners were also visiting Star Wars creator George Lucas there, doing research for the trilogy of films they were set to oversee after wrapping HBO's Emmy-winning fantasy drama, The Game of Thrones. Now, a few months later, those plans are as much in ruins as King's Landing, very creative, Late Monday came the announcement that Benioff and Weiss were no longer attached to the trilogy. They were hired to shepherd back in February 2018. The news predictably sparked frenzy amongst Star Wars fans on social media. Some speculated that the exit had to do with a rare public appearance the duo made over the weekend at the Austin Film Festival, where they were candid about the mistakes they made during their Game of Thrones reign and how they had to learn on the job. Others were surprised that it was Benioff and Weiss' trilogy and not the other one in the works from The Last Jedi writer, director Rian Johnson, who is also in fan crosshairs, that was being shelved. It just sounds like Fragile Egos to me. Let us continue. Benioff and Weiss said Monday that they were caught in a push and pull that came with juggling one of the world's biggest movie franchises and the $250 million Netflix deal that they signed in August. There are only so many hours in the day, and we felt we could not do justice to both Star Wars and our Netflix projects, so we're regretfully stepping away from Star Wars. While there's some truth in their stated reasoning for parting ways with Lucasfilm, instead of say there is more nuance to the story. Obviously, there's a lot more than meets the eye. Sources tell The Hollywood Reporter that Benioff and Weiss' exit had been brewing since August. Lucasfilm chief Kathleen Kennedy is said to have been unhappy with the Netflix deal, inked just as they were scheduled to begin work on Star Wars. Benioff and Weiss had said multiple times that they would not turn their focus to Star Wars until production wrapped on the final season of Thrones, which ended in July 2018. Makes sense. Kennedy was not convinced that the pair, known for focusing on one project at a time, again, just they don't want to take on multiple things at once, could develop a sci-fi trilogy while also overseeing a film and TV projects at Netflix. Sources say that the duo had shopped for an overall deal over the summer, that they told potential suitors that they plan to work on Star Wars concurrently with any projects under their new deal, which doesn't kind of fit their persona because, again, they only work on one thing at a time, but somehow are going to balance taking on Star Wars and something else. Sources say Netflix learned of Benioff and Weiss' Star Wars departure mere days before news broke on Monday. Benioff and Weiss' departure also marks the latest in what has become a tenuous relationship between Netflix and Disney. Sources say Disney was among the early meetings the Thrones pair had for an overall deal, though the Mouse House did not make the final cut. Ha ha! Screw you! Ha ha! Amazon was a frontrunner before Netflix swooped in. Disney famously severed ties with the streamer years ago when it began to pull back its Marvel movies as it prepared its own Disney Plus streaming service. Disney networks more recently began rejecting advertising from Netflix. I would think that they would take on something that is worth a lot more, that would pay them a lot more. Despite that, Star Wars has such a legacy and such a reputation that to be involved with that, and if it was a success, you would be just in the limelight for so long, and you get so many deals from that eventually would profit much greater than just 250 over many years. Representatives from Disney, Lucasfilm, Netflix, and Benioff and Weiss declined to comment for this story, obviously, because again, there's a lot more that meets the eye. While Benioff and Weiss were in high demand after wrapping the mega hit Thrones, controversial final season notwithstanding, nine-figure deals such as theirs have traditionally been reserved for prolific producers who can manage multiple projects at once. An example is Netflix paid Ryan Murphy $300 million over 5 years, and he's working on 10 projects less than 2 years after signing the deal. So it just seems like it's not something that is going to be in the cards for them, that they can't handle more than one thing at once. And Benioff and Weiss, for their part, have never tackled anything other than Game of Thrones and have effectively only made 73 episodes of television over the past decade. And this is the part that baffles me. You're paying $250 million, despite this over a couple years, you're paying them this much money off hope, off of one project that they've done. And even, again, their resumes are only from season 6 to 8. 1 through 5 was based on source material from somebody else. When they took creative control, they ended up wanting to opt out after season 6 because they have to be the ones in charge of finding source material within themselves, and they can't do it. And so this is Hollywood spilling out so much money for hope, and I don't get that. And that kind of plays into what they're talking about for fans later. Many TV industry insiders at the time questioned why Netflix would spend $250 million to be in second position to Star Wars, but sources familiar with the deal say Netflix and Disney were in a shared first position, meaning the duo could work on both simultaneously. Before signing the deal, Netflix was briefed on the Star Wars plans and wasn't worried about having to wait for them to finish a potential trilogy earmarked for 2022, 24, and 26. And it's not going to be 10 years until Netflix sees their first output. I mean, that means that even if you don't do anything for Netflix until 2026, you have 4 years to create something. And these movies, high profile movies from, Disney, being that they are Star Wars, would take only a year to film and a year to do post-production. At the time of the Netflix pact, Benioff and Weiss were working on treatment for Disney and Lucasfilm. The pair was committed to penning at least one of the films, though the original deal was to write all 3. So, I mean, it started off with making 3 movies, and to treat all of them, and then it became script 1, treat 3. It's just overseeing. It's not anything more than that, but apparently there's not enough hours in the day to do that. And then once you are done with the script, you give it back. If there's anything that needs to be done throughout the time, they can do that and then just keep giving it back. And so Kennedy, according to a source familiar with her thinking, was nervous the duo would become the 4th directors to exit a Star Wars project since she took the helm of Lucasfilm. Josh Trank was fired from a Star Wars standalone movie in 2015. Chris Miller and Phil Lord were canned from solo Star Wars story mid-production in June 2017, and the same year, Colin Trevorrow departed Star Wars Episode 9, replaced by J.J. Abrams. Production under Kennedy has run into trouble, with Tony Gilroy brought in to reshoot and rewrite much of Gareth Edwards' 2016 standalone Rogue One, and Ron Howard stepping in after Lord and Miller's departure from Solo to finish the project. So, I mean, that just shows how terrible Disney is making Star Wars. Meanwhile, Benioff and Weiss were also feeling the heat and began having second thoughts about jumping into Star Wars due to what one source describes as toxic fandom. This is the part where I don't truly understand, because it's not toxic fandom. If you spend your own money on something that is trash, you're allowed to have an opinion about it. If you go to a restaurant and the food is not good, you're allowed to say, I did not enjoy this food. But apparently to these guys over at Disney and Star Wars, if you have an opinion that is not good, I mean, Rian Johnson's very well known for going on Twitter and finding people who talk down upon his work and his, movies that he's associated with, to personally attack them. And the problem is, just because those producers have wasted their money, they expect other people to waste their money on their work, or it's their fault that they failed. No, if you make something good, people will go to it. They will gravitate towards it, and word of mouth will say, hey, go and watch this. Whether forces, internal or external, were in play, Benioff and Weiss wanted out. It was hard to quit. It just sounds like fragile egos, and they realize that they are not creative enough to take on the lead by themselves, and without source material, they can't handle it. But, I mean, what are you guys' thoughts? What do you guys think about this? Are any of you guys surprised? Any of you guys not really know what happened with Game of Thrones? They pretty much just 86 Game of Thrones early for nothing. But what do you guys think? Leave in the comments down below. If you're new to the channel and would like to see more, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell notification to be notified whenever a new video goes up. If you like this video, please go ahead and give it a like and share it. It really does a lot more than you guys think. And again, are any of you guys surprised by this? Definitely, unfortunately not with how Hollywood standards are today. But I will see you guys in the next one. Have a good one.